Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah and today we're going to be looking at this piece of metal, the Quiet Carry IQ. This is on loan from Nick Shabazz. I don't know if he got this from the Quiet Carry company. He could have just purchased it, but let's just assume that it was cherry picked for him. I try not to let that affect anything, obviously. Let's do our size comparisons. We've got our Spyderco PM2, we've got our Para 3. This is a pretty small blade, 2.9 inches. It's got kind of this modified sheep's foot blade here. So we'll get a quick confirmation on that 2.9 inch. I'd say about 2.75 in cutting length. What else can we compare it to? I've got the new Todd knife and tool. Roxy by Wee and Malware by Bestech. The Quiet Carry is very, very, very tiny. I mean, that's kind of in their name. That's kind of what they're shooting for. So, even though this is a longer blade than the Roxy, the knife itself is incredibly small compared to it. We'll get a quick thickness comparison here, just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. Very, 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 very small. It reminds me a lot of, not overall, but in the size category of the 3-inch Shamwari. It's a little bit smaller than that, but in the same wheelhouse. With that out of the way, let's get into our dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and terrible of this piece of metal. First off, in the decent, I want to talk about the modified sheep's foot blade. This blade is in Elmax, which is a really good steel. I think when the knife first came out, they weren't using this kind of steel, and I think Elmax is pretty good. It's definitely a premium steel, stainless steel, pretty decent cutting retention. It's not quite as good as the M390s and the 20CVs of the world, but not that far behind. I think it's just in shouting distance of that. The blade itself, it's got this little swedge type dealy thing on the top. Reminds me a little bit of a 940, Benchmade 940, as far as how deep it goes into the blade and just kind of the look of the top of the blade. Obviously, sheep's foot is not quite the same thing. This is a pretty useful little blade shape. It's just got just enough of a point to, wheedle into a piece of clamshell or something and get it going. Not the most practical tip, but for most small EDC cutting tasks, I think this should get the job done. The finish on the blade is just kind of a satin finish. It's pretty nice. It's pretty attractive. No complaints really in the finish of the blade from me. Next thing I like to talk about is just this internal Lockbar cutout relief. It's internal, which is kind of nice. It adds to the overall simplicity of the knife. Just having a very simple, clip side is not something you would see quite this clean on most knives. By doing that, I think it makes it even more in that kind of upper echelon of just straight, simple design. It's not something you see on that many knives, so that's kind of cool. The action on this is in the decent. It's good. It's caged ceramic ball bearings, and it takes a little getting used to, but once you get it down, the action on this is pretty good. For a very small knife, it's hard to get, the blade to shut as well as this does. And, overall, it's good. Let's go through it in my standard OCD, open, close, disengage in the wrong order. On the open, it's good. I'm going to talk more about the flipper tab. I think the actual action itself, not the overall experience, but the action of it coming out. The detent is pretty much right. It's good. I wouldn't make it any stronger or weaker. I think it's good enough. The smoothness of the knife in general is pretty good. It's not amazing. It's definitely not as drop shutty as the Shamwari, mind you, but it's decent. So open is good. Disengagement, there's no lock stick really, but we'll get into the finer details of exactly why I'm not in love with the disengagement aspect of it. There's nothing critical here. It gets the job done. I would say it's perfectly adequate in terms of disengaging the knife, but nothing that's blowing me out of the water. And then the fall shut, like I said, it's maybe 1.5 jostles, 1.75 jostles to close it. It's hard to get action really good on the close on such a tiny little blade. But it's competent here. So you put all three things together. It's definitely not getting its seat at the excellent table, but good enough to be at the kids' table with the other decent weirdo kids. One thing I like on the clip is it's very deep carry. This is really nice. I have kind of mixed feelings as far as how left justified it is. It works. I mean, the knife is so small anyway. I don't think it matters too much. On a bigger knife, a wider knife, if you had the clip all the way to one side, the knife might tend to want to hang and kind of contort itself to balance out that weight. On something this small, it's not that big of a deal, really, to have it, so far off to one side. Again, it's kind of got its own little unique flair when they do that. And just being so deep carry anyway, I tend to forgive something like this being a little far over to the side. They've got the cutout here so you can get to the screw to screw this in. At first I thought this was all one piece. It's not. So you have the back spacer and you have the clip are kind of like sandwiched together. So it's pretty efficient use of that one screw is going through both scales, the clip and the back spacer to kind of hold it all together. Which is very efficient design. Really, the only downside to this method is that you have to have the hole drilled in. Not that big of a deal. I think that's a fine compromise to get everything so neatly packed together here at the back of the knife. So I appreciate that. This little, minuscule back spacer does the job. I was a little worried that the blade would be too close to the back, but I can't really get in there. So it being shorter and not covering as much, I don't think is a negative here. Unless you got very narrow baby or alien fingers, I think you'll be all right on the backspace. You're not getting cut, so that's good. Next thing I like to talk about that I've kind of been alluding to here is just the overall package of the simplicity of the design. I really like just two screws, 2 bits of hardware, really holding the whole knife together. You have the Lockbar insert, which does have a steel insert, I will mention, that you can see here. Little detent balls right there. So aside from that, you've just got the 2 screws. Again, very akin to the Shamwari that I reviewed in terms of just design. It's extremely compact with its, blade to body ratio. I like this. They got the little dot thing here, the like ellipses +1. It's okay. I don't have anything negative to say about that, really. Technically it'd fall under like the aesthetic of design. I don't see how this could help me in any way practically, but it's such a simplistic design overall. I would kind of like that to just be gone. Might make it a little bit more bland or easy to lose in the sea of knives if you didn't have kind of that design aesthetic there. So it's a take it or leave it on that. But overall, the design is very good, and I appreciate the efficiency of it. Next thing, and this is the last decent thing I have to talk about, and it's the fit and finish. Fit and finish is pretty decent. It's centered. There's chamfering where there needs to be chamfering. Got the little kind of double heavy chamfer here to give you some access to the lock bar. There's no sharp bits in the kind of crazy area here. Nothing glaring in terms of like manufacturing mistakes or faux pas. So overall, fit and finish gets a passing grade. Next, let's move into the excellent thing. And I have one excellent thing, and I'm going to actually get a weigh-in for this. I've saved this for the best for last. The weight on this guy is very reasonable. We're at less than 2.2 ounces, which is excellent. This is extremely lightweight. I mean, shoot, even comparing it to like a pen or something, it's in the same ballpark of just a pen. So having something this small, this unassuming, it all kind of adds up to just a really good carry. Again, goes to the quiet carry aspect of this. Is obvious that this is what they're going for, but you have the blade is flush. You have no blade sticking out here. Deep carry clip, very low profile flipper tab's not going to get hung up on too much, and it's just incredibly lightweight. So really, I think the biggest draw to this knife, the biggest reason to consider this is just the sheer, carryability of it as an actual everyday carry knife. If you're in the office, if you want to be low key, if you have a lot of stuff in your pocket and you need to trim down, those are kind of good reasons why you might want to consider this knife for just the sheer carryability of it. Something I haven't mentioned, I don't want to add like a neutral section, but it's not, I can't justify it in the good or in the nitpick. It's obviously not excellent either, but the ergonomics on this are neutral. For such a small knife, this gets the job done. It's like barely a 4-finger knife for me, medium-sized hands. I could see using it as a 3-handed still be okay. Again, this is not something you're going to be cutting hundreds of feet of rope with. This is just to open up a couple letters or chop into an apple or whatever. So I just kind of want to address the ergonomics outside of space and time. It's just neutral. I don't know. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. I don't have strong feelings one way or the other. Now let's get into the nitpicks. I have 4 things to talk about in the nitpick section. Kind of alluded to this earlier, but this flipper tab, in terms of actual action, is just not enough. And I think they know that they have a problem because they put a lot of jimping on here because it's such a tiny little flipper. I mean, comparing it to even like the Roxy, which has a comically small flipper tab that I like. I think that it's positioned so well that it's like primes you with the little shoulders right here to sit right where it needs to be to flip and have 100% accuracy. But even this tiny little comically small flipper tab is still much larger than the one that's on the IQ. So I would say if I'm just kind of in unconscious competence mode, which is, I get to the point where I practice with a knife, I don't really have to concentrate and I could just flip it open. I have yet to get to that point with this knife. I have to actually feel and look and concentrate to make sure I'm about to do it the right way. If I kind of, blase style go in and try to flick it, half the time I'm just going to fall off the flipper. And it's really painful because they have all this extra jimping to help you so you don't slip off. And all it means is when you slip off anyway, it rubs your finger raw. I'm pretty frustrated with this. I was tempted to put this into the terrible just because I'm so paranoid, I guess is the right word, of every time I'm about to flip this knife of, is this going to work or not? Or am I going to fly off and then be greeted with some pain? Like it's actual pain. If it was, I'm falling off just because it was slippery, but I can try it over and over and it's not hurting me, I wouldn't be as skittish about it, but it's really uncomfortable when it does fly off. And so I just 100% concentration to make sure I do it the right way. It's totally achievable. You can get used to it. But I don't know, at least for me, it's not to the point where I can just kind of, without thinking, do it. And it hurts every time I do it. I'm getting little scrapies on my finger there just from this review. So, and you have to, a lot of it isn't just the dexterity of the flipper tab itself, but I'm also juggling at the same time, not putting any pressure whatsoever on the lock bar. If you put pressure here, this is just a booby trap, basically. If I put my finger here, I'm not going to be able to open it up and it's going to hurt my finger. I don't want to do it. So I'm very carefully concentrating to keep my finger down here while I'm flipping it, and I'm not accidentally pushing it up against my finger here in order to get, all my stars aligned and open up the knife. Pretty frustrating. Cool. So we talked about the flipper tab and the lock bar. Next thing is the price. So this is just kind of the stonewash titanium version with the LMAX. It's clocking in at 182 on their website. I don't know. I feel like it's a quality knife. They're using good premium parts. I'm not like really upset about that price, but I'm also, keeps me from considering it. If it was $120, I'd be like, maybe if I got used to this flipper tab, I could make it work just for times that I want something ultra compact. Then maybe, I could kind of pull it out in special occasions. They have a CF version that's like a faux bolster where it's like half CF and half just titanium. That one's $198. That would be the one I would get. I feel like that's a little bit classier or just appeals to my personal interest, but that one isn't too bad. I mean, it's still under $200 at $198. Both prices aren't blowing me out of the water, though. If I didn't have this flipper tab problem, I think I could forgive, the other things that I'm talking about here, but I'm just kind of left mediocre on the price. Next nitpick is the disengaging here. So there's no lock stick and it totally works, but I'm not a huge fan of this, narrow part, especially on the show side. It's just too sharp. You're working with such thin scales here that they wanted to make sure you had enough room to get in, but now when you're pushing up against either side, but especially this side, it's just kind of jabbing into you. And it needed to be rounded and kind of deeper into the knife to where I could actually see the lock bar from this side. Just right here, just a little bit. It could be subtle, and it breaks the line. Aesthetically from a design standpoint, you have a little divot there. I get it. I understand why you want to keep those lines, but maybe have the dots incorporated on that to kind of communicate that it was intentional. Have like a little subtle dot on like a little mound going around it. That way you get your visual flair, but you also make something a little bit more practical to where you can get into that other side of the lock bar without this side feeling like it's jabbing into your thumb when you're trying to disengage it. It's not a big deal. Again, if you're taking your knife out, once or twice a day, it's not going to be the end of the world. But, if I were to redesign the knife, I would definitely incorporate that. I don't have anything terrible to say about this knife per se, so let's get right into the conclusion. The conclusion is I should like the knife more than I do. If I'm trying to be, objective about it, I think there's, certain space that this knife, could do well in. Just the extreme gentleman's carry, EDC, very lightweight knife. I'm just so turned off by this flipper tab that I don't know if I can ever be enthusiastic about this being in my collection. It's right on the edge. If they could make the flipper tab a little bit bigger, a different shape, something that it was a little bit more reliable. Outside of that, I don't know if I can recommend this knife. It's not personally doing it for me, but I wouldn't make fun of anybody that got this knife and liked it. I think it carves its space in the market and the industry, and I think it would make sense for some people, but it's definitely not without its flaws. I'm kind of lukewarm on this knife. I hope this was helpful to you. I'll catch you in my next video. Adios. Kind of mediocre on this knife, to be honest. Lukewarm.